Hey everyone, I have been so excited to get this thing off the ground. We had this organized. We've been talking about getting this interview with Tim Campbell for quite a while now. It's about an hour. It's worth it. We go over a bunch of stuff, future plans, looking at how early access did or did not work, some talks about the patch that's coming out soon and how that's all going to work out, and really looking at how the units are going to get and how everything is going to get revamped moving forward, different ideas. I am very excited about it. So, without further ado, enjoy my conversation with Tim Campbell, game director at Frostshine Studios. So, Tim, thanks so much for joining us here today. Before we get into, we got a whole bunch of questions, and we'll probably run over time. Hopefully, we don't go too long here. For those of people that are, maybe new to things, figuring things out, new to Stormgate, interested in Frostgiant, can you just give us a refresher on who you are, what you do?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on today. My name's Tim Campbell. I'm the game director on Stormgate. My background in the games industry has gone through Blizzard and Westwood, so I had a chance to work on both Red Alert 2 and then Warcraft 3 and the Frozen Throne as well. And so Stormgate is a continuation of my passion for this genre.
Gotcha. Thank you. So, Stormgate has been in early access for 4 or 5 months at this point, coming up back in August. But before we get deeper, because we do want to talk about future plans, before we get deeper into plans for the future, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the last 4 months, both what went right, what went wrong, what you want to improve on.
Yeah, that's a great question. We could actually probably spend the whole interview talking about just that one question. For me, early access was a completely new
Mhm.
experience. I've never released a game into early access, and I've never built a game trying to incorporate as much community feedback and involvement as we have with Stormgate. And so, fortunately, a lot went right. There have also been plenty of bumps to the road and things that have not gone as expected as well too. I think in the what went right column, I think we have done a really good job of building a development team that is passionate about the type of game that we're making, about the real time strategy genre. This is something that we live and breathe and that we care very, very deeply about. And Stormgate, shipping a game into early access in this climate in the games industry and in a genre that is as hard as this, I count as a stellar win. I'm proud of what the team accomplished, the technology we've built, and what we were able to ship into early access to get community feedback on. That I think has been something that I'm very happy about. Now, the reception going into early access, I mean, it's no secret that the launch into early access didn't go as smoothly as we wanted to. Player counts aren't where they're at, and there's, you know, a valid amount of dissatisfaction with the game being unfinished and unpolished in a lot of ways. For myself, just looking at this and kind of thinking back through the process and what can we do different going forward, I think one of the challenges was that we misjudged maybe how the early access launch of the game would be received. We knew that early access was a program for taking a game that's unfinished and maybe in some ways unpolished with rough edges, and then developing it the rest of the way to a completed and polished state with community involvement. But I think we misjudged the appetite for how raw and how unfinished would be acceptable for that entry point into early access. And so, I wish that we had held on to it a little bit longer and shipped it in a more polished state going into early access. But the goal for us has not changed. Our goal for Stormgate from day one has been to develop it with the community. And so, even though shifting into early access has been bumpy and there's clearly a lot of room to improve and a lot of development ahead of us, we are getting really, really valid player feedback that is directly helping to shape the game every single day. And that was our objective here. And so the team, fortunately, through the process of releasing early access and seeing feedback and criticism, the team has managed to keep their heads held up. They've managed to keep a positive attitude, and they are hard at work. In every release, I think you're going to see continued big steps in the right direction for us. And so, looking ahead, what I would do differently, we have to play the hand that we're dealt, and we're at this point now. So, I think the road ahead is one where we're focusing a bit differently on different goals than we did for early access. For early access, the goal was to deliver a scope, a broad scope of features and modes and a bunch of 3 different factions, and kind of check all these boxes so that we could get this baseline version of the game into early access and then develop it the rest of the way. Now we are shifting into a narrower focus. We want to cut down what we're working on so that we can deliver it at a higher quality. Basically, iterate, improve, polish, and do that one segment of the game at a time as we move through the surface area that we've already shipped.
And do you think, looking back at early access a little bit, there's been a lot of discourse about this, what you should have done, what you should not have done. Do you still think that broad scope of we're going to hit, it may not be done, it may not even be close to getting done, but we're going to hit every or most things that we're saying we're going to do in this early access release? Do you still believe that that was the play? Or, as some people have said, maybe go into far more vertically slicing? We're going to really nail 1v1 and add other things later, for example.
Yeah, I think this is a really good line of questioning, and I think the criticism for our performance at release, I think is valid, right?
Hmm.
Hindsight's 2020. We have thought about this a lot. I have thought about this a lot. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. Can we
Yeah.
go back and change things? And it's really hard to play that game because we don't really have the benefit of seeing how it would have played out had we made different choices. As it went, we really raised our funding, and we built the company and assembled the team and took all these steps on the core vision of delivering a Blizzard style RTS. And the big challenge with this is that Blizzard style RTSs are the best out there. They're the gold
Hmm.
standard, right? And they're built by huge teams over many years with just really, really large scale budgets and the support of a huge company like Blizzard and Activision behind them. And so this already was an ambitious goal, but Blizzard RTSs, just speaking super broadly, they have two things going for them at a really high level. They are really broadly scoped. They have single player experiences and multiplayer and ladders and editors and just all of these things. So they have this huge scope, and they have Blizzard polish. They have all of the quality and the tightness and the refinement that comes with all of this iteration. For a small company like ours, um, it wasn't something feasible in the budget that we had to check both of those boxes
Hmm.
at the start of an early access release. So we kind of had to pick our poison in terms of what we could do. And we decided to lean into early access. We decided to build the framework of Stormgate and effectively this first pass version of the game, and then iterate on it with the community and with the feedback, and then level up the quality as we went. I think that approach is valid still in hindsight. If you just targeted 1v1 or just targeted one faction or you just targeted one subsection, um, I think there's huge questions about how that would have played out, or if
Hmm.
we would have been able to raise the funding that we did to build this style of game. Because 1v1 with limited factions might have been more polished, but that's not really a Blizzard game at that point. And so I think the direction we went in was it was valid from a development perspective. We really did accomplish a lot in a relatively short amount of time in development years. Um, but I do wish that we had held on to it a little bit longer and we had gotten some more of that quality. But I don't think it's feasible for a small independent company like ours to be able to execute fully on both sides. And so I think we just misjudged the point at which we took it into early access and really started getting that large scale community feedback.
Gotcha. Speaking of that feedback and these changes, I recently spoke to Alan Dilling. Great interview. If you missed it, those of you watching, go take a look. But he's your new art director. You're making a bunch of different changes to this art design and some other things. Were these changes a response to some of this early access feedback? And then what other ways, regardless of that question, what other ways is the game potentially changing based on that early access feedback?
Yeah, that was a great interview. I actually really enjoyed watching that. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out.
There we go.
Um, but yeah, the plan to iterate and raise quality and deliver a polished experience has always been our vision for the game. The question was when and in what stage would that happen? And so our plan has always been to enter early access, to get the game in players' hands, and to iterate and improve from there. So we've kind of shifted from a broad focus of building the skeleton and the bones and get the tool for creating levels and prove that we can do all these things, and we've shifted now to a narrower focus where we are iterating and trying to improve the quality. That was not a reaction to negative
Mhm.
feedback. That was the plan from day one. And actually, the the switch and bringing Alan in, that was something which initiated. It was brought up actually by our original art director Jesse Brophy, who had really climbed a huge mountain for us with taking Stormgate to the early access release. It involved a lot of effort, a lot of late nights, and he was just hitting a point where he wanted to do something different to recharge and just take care of himself. And so he suggested the change, and it's something that I think looking back on has been a win-win. But we went into actually with a bit of nerves about it.
Mm.
Jesse's a very valuable team member and somebody that we care about a lot, and this sort of switch on the fly is risky, right? But it has, in hindsight, let Jesse shift into areas that are really of passion and interest to him. Let him get back to just doing cool stuff on the team as opposed to directing, which sometimes are a huge tug of
Mhm.
war, right? And in fact, if you have enjoyed all of the lighting changes that we've had in our recent updates, that is directly Jesse's work that he's been improving the game on underneath the hood. And Alan has been able to step in here and really shift in, bringing his just a really high level of enthusiasm and energy, and of course his own creative perspective on where to take the game. And that transition, I think, both of them deserve a lot of credit for having it gone so smoothly. They both have done and are doing an awesome job to make Stormgate a great game.
Yeah, no, I'm really okay. Spherical wheels. I talked about it with Alan, but I think I can speak for a lot of people when I say that we are very excited to see some of these concepts actually enter the game and not just be there in concept art. But speaking of changes, we talked about some art changes in that process. But in the recent AMA you did, and that was a beast of a thread, you mentioned that each faction is really still in its first iterations, due kind of for some major revamps. What do you anticipate these looking like? And then are there any specific mechanics or gameplay ideas that you particularly want to look at? Infest or Power Inferno, whatever it is, these different mechanics that are maybe just a little controversial.
Yeah, hey, can I answer all of them? I
Fair
want to
enough.
revisit
Hey,
all
I
these things. So or I'll just speak for
Mhm.
us on this project. When we were building Stormgate, um, effectively we were laying the tracks that the train was just about to move down. We were
Mhm.
just staying ahead. We would be building things and we'd be immediately putting them out in a Gamescom video or into
Mhm.
some alpha or beta build, and we'd be moving on to the next thing, right? We didn't really have time to stay and cook. We didn't really have time to just iterate and make things better, the way that we might have if we were within the cozy embrace of a
Mhm.
big company, right? And so as we would get that capability, we would take our best pass at getting into the game. And there may have been constraints, right? Like we may have just gotten the ability to heal, but we didn't have AoE capabilities yet. Or we just got the ability to, have cargo in a transport, but we
Mhm.
didn't have the ability to do this with transports. And so we built out the game with the constraints that we had at the time that we were building it. And early access basically showed our first pass across the board of this game. This is the beginnings of what we want to build into our vision for Stormgate. It's not the end result. It's nothing that we think is final or is in a polished state yet. So the Faction 2.0 pass
Mhm.
is something where we are really focused on going end to end through the game, taking very specific slices of it to focus on at every given moment, and to iterate and raise its quality. What I think we shipped to early access had a lot of good ideas and had a lot of interesting things, but I think the factions, just speaking very broadly,
Mhm.
were not as cohesive. They didn't have as strong of theming. They didn't have as tight of a creative vision around them. Um, as you would want at a 1.0 expression of Stormgate, at a full launch, right? They were our first pass. And some things worked, some things didn't work. And Factions 2.0 is our opportunity to go back, assess what worked and didn't work, make changes, and everything's on the table right now. Art, audio, design. We're going to be adding and removing units. We're going to be changing features. Infest is going to be going through some changes, but I can confirm it's still going to stay. It'll probably change its theming and its name and what spawns and how it works. But the concept is actually going to stay with the Infernals. I will say one note on that. What I want to see with Infest is for it to not become an ever-present core
Mm-hmm.
element of the faction that you see in every single matchup and is expressed in all these different ways throughout it. But I want it to become more of a choice that players can specialize into if they want to during the course of a game, but they don't have to. That there's other strategies to play Infernals that are not Infest based. And so again, we're going to kind of take that concept, ditch all the things about it that are frustrating for players and that we aren't really enthusiastic about as a dev team, and then kind of take the next crack at it to make it better and to make it more fun and cooler. So we're going to start with Infernals. Then we're moving through Vanguard, and then we'll be moving through Celestials, and each one of the races will go through a different set of changes. The Infernals we started with because we felt like they had the solidest baseline that we could build up from. They have a lot of really interesting race mechanics, whether it's Animus or Shroud or the charge system on their buildings. And really, we felt like there's a lot of merit to all of those different things, but that at the current stage they feel a little disconnected from each other. They don't feel like the gears are turning with the teeth interlocking into each other into kind of this harmonious whole, right? We believe that we can tie the faction together better artistically and gameplay wise, and so that's what we're focused on. With the other factions, I think there's different problems that we're going to be solving, different challenges. And the Celestials we're ultimately going to get to last in this process. And I think they'll ultimately have the biggest overhaul of any of the factions because they're the most unique and out there and off the beaten path. And we tried some pretty wacky things with them, but we're going to save that to last and work our way towards them. So this process is going to be playing out over multiple releases. It's time consuming and we're a small team. So, our ask to players is to bear with us as we roll this out, but the end result should absolutely be worth it.
Gotcha. I got two follow-up questions here. One is for Marksman in the Discord. In the new concept art, it looks like meat farms no longer have fell hogs. Do you have a comment on fell hogs and whether they continue to exist in the new version of Infernals?
Oh boy, I don't know if I can actually talk about this without Gerald, hooking me from off screen and pulling me away. I love Fellhogs, and the Fellhog concept is remaining, but we are in the process of retheming the whole faction to feel more
Mm-hmm.
cohesive. And I think what that means is Fellhogs in their current form will be changing, but I'm just going to leave it out there that there is still hope yet for Fellhogs themselves in some other place on the faction.
Awesome. But I guess a more serious question, although I'm sure for Marksman, that was the most serious question of the entire interview. As you look going forward into this Faction 2.0, as we take a look at Infernal, Vanguard, Celestials, are there your kind of archetypical playstyles that you're looking at? At one point, you talked about Infernals having a swarmy playstyle and then a more smaller amount of units playstyle that we haven't really seen come to the forefront yet. As you look forward going into 2.0, can you talk about what these different archetypes that you expect each faction to have are?
Yeah, I can get into that a little
Hmm.
bit, but some of it will be firming up more
Yeah,
as we get into
obviously not
each of the
holding you to this.
2.0s. The Infernals are the clearest in my mind
Hmm.
because we're already well at work with them. But generally speaking, as the race that you're fighting against in our initial campaign is kind of our monstrous race, we want to make them a bit more terrifying. We want them to make them a bit more just. Uh, monstrous and scary. Like they need to be a believable threat
Hmm.
in our universe. And so we're working to build them up in a new direction. You've seen Alan's artwork, and you did the interview with him, so you could see a taste of what we're doing. But that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Mhm.
There's a lot going into this faction, and you'll see them become, I think, really elevated visually, and the gameplay is getting it's getting addressed alongside with the visuals. I think we never hit what I was hoping to hit with the scale of their armies and the swarminess of them. So we're really trying to lean into that, make their unit counts be even higher, make some of their earlier tier 1 units be more squishier, and make the early game be something which you can have more carnage and more battles that fully resolve and lose a bunch of units and build a bunch of units, to kind of get that churn of excitement back into the faction, and make them less reliant on singular mechanics like Infest that I think force matches to play out in a certain way for them. Open up the different play styles, and getting back to what you were talking about in terms of teching and focusing on bigger, larger units, some of which we haven't even released yet, or leaning into more of a swarmy style for the faction. And so I think both of those are front and center with what we're wanting to do with them. The Vanguard are kind of going in a bit of a different direction. We're looking to push the unit counts of those two factions a bit further apart. So with the Vanguard, you'll be having fewer units that are a bit more expensive and a bit tougher and more dangerous on the battlefield. So we're looking to make the mechs feel bigger and stompier and more effective than they were before. We'd like them to have some teeth in combat and really see units get cut down a bit faster than we have in the past. And with both of the factions, really lean into some ways to add some spikier moments to them. So we have some moments of drama. We really like overall the tone and the pace of the longer time to kill where we settled into, but we feel like what we have there as a baseline is missing moments of excitement during matches.
Mhm.
And so it's coming across as a bit more on the boring side than is intended to. And so with these Faction 2.0s, we're trying to add some more of that excitement in. And a lot of that is going to come from making very specific unit matchups or abilities that are, I think, highlight points for the faction. Let those become more effective. And so that we can get these moments of kind of dramatic turnarounds for players in the role matchups. And Celestials, again, I'm just going to kind of hand wave. They're further out, and I think we're going to make bigger changes with them. So I'll leave those to another time.
Gotcha. Actually, so I do want to move on, but going back to what you said about Vanguards having like bigger, stompier units, one of the things, because I come from a StarCraft background, I spent a lot of time with that. One of the things that's been in discourse at the highest levels is that, well, bunch of players, Terran players, Zerg players, Protoss players, they all make mistakes. They all probably make a similar amount of mistakes at a similar level. But because Protoss in particular has units that are 8 supply that are much more expensive, when they make a mistake, it is far more impactful than, losing 5 Marines or losing a pack of Zerglings or something. When you look at redesigning this, when you look at redesigning Vanguard and making them a little bit more centralized onto these bigger units, how do you go and make sure that you don't fall into that trap?
Yeah, this is something that we'll get into more
Hmm.
later as it
Yeah.
firms up. But it's accentuated, I think, by veterancy. I think it's a good point that you mean. Like you also have a faction here where if you happen to make one of those mistakes, and I excel at making mistakes when I
Same.
when I play Stormgate. So, but if you happen to and you lose a veteran unit,
Hmm.
then that sets you back even more, right, than a normal unit that was just trained. So I think you're right that there's some dynamics here that aren't playing to our goals for the factions, and that we're going to be really looking at overhauling. I'm hoping to take veterancy in a bit of a different direction. It's
Okay.
it's a concept that I like. I really like the idea of humans as they're fighting these terrible foes, gaining experience and becoming grizzled veterans. Like it's a fantasy that I'm really excited about, but I think we can break some new ground with our take on it. I think some component of it is going to stay into being individual units that rank up as they gain experience. But I don't think that's enough. I don't think that's where we should stop. I'm interested in building a layer on top of the faction that as your army is getting more experience, you're able to actually unlock some veterancy options for your army as a whole that's different than just individual units. And so we're going to be trying to make decisions like that that would be more forgiving of mistakes.
Hmm.
So if you do happen to lose your veteran units, you don't actually lose the overall veterancy for your army. You're still moving ahead with this. And so that'll be one of the aspects of that faction that we really look on ironing that out as we work on them.
I gotcha. That also gives counterplay. If you specialize against something, your opponent can identify, and that's awesome.
Yeah,
So
that
go ahead.
actual concept
Hmm.
is something we have not expressed yet, but we really liked at the outset as we were starting on Stormgate. The idea that the human faction could be the most adaptable and versatile at the start of the game,
Hmm.
but as they make choices to specialize and get advantages, they become a bit more calcified, and the kind of the flexibility that they have narrows as they home in on their full power potential. And so as you go through the match, you're trading flexibility for committing to certain ways to harden your army to get advantages.
Gotcha. So again, as we look at this redesign process, could you walk us through the process of developing, or I guess revamping at this point, a new unit? Is it a bunch of iteration? Like, how does that process work from I have an idea for something I want to now this is in the game and we're really starting to play around with it?
Yeah, I think in a vacuum, we would start by trying to identify a gap
Hmm.
in the faction right now. We've put these factions out into players' hands. We can see how they play, and we can identify gaps really easily. We can tell whether they have a of options in tier one, or they're lacking a heavy anti-air option late in the game. We can see these pretty clearly, and so
Hmm.
then the question becomes, how do we design a unit to fill these gaps? And we can kind of walk ourselves to a set of goals really easily. Oh, this needs to be tier one. It needs to be anti-air. It needs to be magic themed because we have a space open on the magic caster barracks, right? And then we kind of l- zoom into that, and we try to figure out what gameplay or expression of the unit can we do that wouldn't step on everything else, that might be able to kind of synergize with some of the other units around it. Um, that's in a vacuum. Where we are now in development, there's a lot of arrows in flight. There's models being worked on and art's kind of committed. We may have concepts that were already done a while ago, but we never got to execute on. And so really we try to sift through a lot of what's going on and try to connect the dots between, oh, that's a really cool, piece of art, or that's a concept that we missed that we never really got to execute on. Let's promote that to fill into the slot and then execute on it. So it's a collaboration between art and design, and sometimes art just comes up with um, a rad looking unit or some design that's really eye catching, and then that inspires design to say, you know what, if we had a unit like that, we could do this thing. And
Hmm.
in practice, design pushes art and art pushes design, and you get into this collaborative, just sort of virtuous cycle here. And that's what where we're at right now with these factions. We're all looking at the factions. We all play the factions, and I think in some cases it's clear generally what they need, but then the specifics of that unit, we will kind of pick design ideas and maybe art assets that are in flight, connect them, and then put them into the game on our dev build. So then we can just do play tests and hammer
Hmm.
on it and see if it holds water or not. And sometimes we'll come up with something genius. Other times we'll need to scrap that and come up with a plan B, right? Because it just didn't work out the way we thought.
Talking about those dev builds, how often, because I know, because I was in the pre-alpha and everything else, the amount of times that we ran into, we were given a build, and then it was clear the devs had one idea about how something was going to work. And that was like 10% of how it actually worked. And it actually ended up with turrets in your opponent's base that were uncounterable. Thanks, Revy. But more importantly, how often would you say when your developer is like at the end result of playtesting, when you go to put it into the broader community's hands, how often are you all right that that's how it's going to actually work? And how often is
Oh
it
my
much more
goodness.
of, oh man, what have we
I
done?
am terrified every time we put a build out. Terrified of what we're going to see players do. So I know people wonder, like,
Hmm.
why do they need people to play the game? Why don't they just play the game themselves, right? Why do you need player
Hmm.
feedback? Like, this is a normal, natural question to ask. But the reality is that developers and players play the game very differently. Developers are playing the game in a rapidly changing environment where from day to day things will break, new features will land, a new unit was added that hasn't been balanced. And so we're playing in a very different environment than players who might be playing on a build that's stable for weeks and that they can really dig into and optimize the way that they're playing. Also, developers know how things are supposed to work in a game, and so they often play nice. They kind of, unintentionally, right? They might use the unit the way it was intended to, whereas players who are actually trying to get an advantage on a ladder for a live game will go straight to whatever the most advantageous strategy is. And so those sometimes are caught internally, but not always. They're very different sets of feedback that we get from both developers and the players. And so that's one of the reasons why we really, really value the community of people who are playing the game and giving us feedback along the way, because it genuinely gives us a very different perspective than our developer play sessions do.
Yeah. And then going back to what you're talking about, okay, we identify gaps and then we try to fill those gaps as much as possible. We could talk about a bunch of different ones that are obvious, but are there any gaps, maybe one per faction, doesn't even have to be that you are very excited that you either see as the most important gap that needs to be filled for the faction right now, or B, that you were probably the most excited about getting something worked up to go fill that gap?
Yeah, I think a lot of times we intend to leave gaps for
Okay.
a variety of reasons. Not always. Sometimes we just run out of time, right?
Yeah.
But I'll give you some examples. So the celestial lack of a traditional transport
Hmm.
was an intentional gap. We wanted to test to see how fun it would be with a faction that has movable structures, has a very flexible build system, and has other ways of kind of warping units around. We wanted to see if that would be sufficient in order to gain some asymmetry rather than having a wash, rinse, repeat transport for every
Hmm.
single faction. Um, and that's something that may very well change when we get to the faction 2.0, because I think there's good and bad things about it. Um, Other factions, well, I guess speaking of the Celestials as well too, I think they're lacking some more early game options. We need some more variety other than Kree winding up, in your worker line, and so we go faction by faction. The other gaps are also intentional and are probably never going to change. For
Hmm.
example, Infernal's not having a traditional healer. That is part of the asymmetry of the faction, and I could see them getting some sort of consume or vampirism, life draining capabilities, but I don't see them ever getting a true healer. And so as we go through faction 2.0, it really is walking a fine line of trying to discern, like, where is this gap hurting us? Where is it introducing actually something frustrating for players versus where is it adding interesting texture to the play experience? And I think for us, from an asymmetry perspective, with our first pass, perhaps we have pushed more asymmetry in small ways and a lot throughout the factions than we should have. So it just introduces kind of noise and some frustration when switching from faction to faction, as opposed to big areas where we really push distinct asymmetry. And then we have the play experience be a bit more consistent and a bit more smooth and fun for players in other areas. And so we're walking that line of figuring where to push for good asymmetry in fun games, and where to pull back from it and make sure that the play experience is just smooth and frictionless.
Gotcha. And then again, looking at this faction 2.0, looking at filling gaps, are there any key mechanics, say for the example, there's no burrowing, I don't think, in Stormgate right now, that are not in the game that you either plan to add or would really like to see added in that enable some really cool new stuff we haven't seen yet?
The list is a mile long. I'll just
Or
be
highlights?
real with you about that. Um, our our challenge right now is not a shortage of ideas. My
Hmm.
laundry list, like I said, is a mile long. The team is also passionate about this sort of game, and there's all sorts of pet ideas all over the place. But where we're at development wise, we've heard the feedback from the community loud and clear, and our focus is on narrowing scope and executing at
Okay.
higher quality. And so our focus for now is less on introducing new mechanics and more on fixing what we have right now so that it feels smooth and polished to players. But as we get through that process and we move ahead, yeah, there's a lot of ideas. For me, I'm really excited about burrowing and subterranean movement. Actually, we've seen that expressed in some of the Westwood games as well
Hmm.
too, and I think that has a bunch of design space that could be explored. And I'm also really excited at um, increasing the interactivity of our terrain and the ways in which it affects combat, so that we can make our maps more interesting and the relationship with units to the maps a bit more dynamic. There's all sorts of things that we can do, from destructible terrain to hazardous terrain to things along those lines. And water is also something that I am excited about. I'd love to get to a point where we could play with deep water more and have amphibious or swimming units that can actually cross over that. I'd love to see my scouts do the dog paddle to cross a river and scout in areas where other units couldn't get to, for example. So but that's all future stuff. We
Hmm.
really want to focus now on just, with the scope that we have, making it as high quality as we can, and then we'll shift gears again to pushing forward.
I'm glad you talked about maps, about something, mechanics we burrow, but also looking at map mechanics, because I want to shift focus now for a second to talk about the campaign that's getting reworked that we'll eventually see more of. Frost Giant Stormgate is on a new engine. It is theoretically, it does things, you have control over it that you have not, maybe theoretically we're not able to do in Warcraft 3 or StarCraft 2 or anything else like that. Does this new technology allow you guys to try new things with the campaign missions that you really haven't been able to do before in RTS games? And if so, can you give us some examples?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking this. So on there, I guess there's part of it that's campaign related and part
Hmm.
editor. So diving into the editor side, Blizzard editors are, like everything else in Blizzard RTS, are the gold standard, right? They spend a lot of time, many years, multiple people working on this, and so we are aiming at that quality of an
Hmm.
editor and would like to one day surpass it. But we still have a lot of development to do on it. So where we're at now, I wouldn't say our editor has broken new ground in terms of we can do all these crazy things that you've never seen before, because Blizzard editors are feature rich. You can just about make any type of game in a Blizzard editor. But we have made significant strides in ease of use and the speed at which you can do things in there. Whether it's improving on tree placement from Warcraft 3's editor and making it be easier to make your trees all line up and not have gaps, and to do so quickly, to adding a replacement tool. So if you put a type of rocks down and then you decide you want to change it to some other terrain formation, you can actually just spray over them and they'll automatically swap from one to another. Our editor is integrated with the game itself. It's not a separate application, so it's a simple press to just toggle between editing a level and playing the game and back again. Um, and so there's a laundry list of these little things that
Hmm.
we've done to make it really slick at a terrain editing and level design perspective. And we've also jumped ahead and added some pretty advanced features, like what we call the cloud blackboard, which is a way that missions can store variables or settings or choices that a player has done for other missions to be able to access. And that's something that we really didn't take a lot of advantage of at early access. But with this campaign revamp, we're taking just we're using a dozen different ways, and really trying to get as much out of it as we can, including collecting a currency that you can spend between missions on permanent upgrades and ways to change your army throughout the campaign. And so we're able to really do a lot of new things for our campaigns using that technology.
Gotcha. So, looking back at the broader as we start to wind things up a little bit, you've had a lot of feedback from early access, even before early access, and that has shown in roadmap changes over and over again as things get moved around in response to feedback and how you all are able to go. How do you triage that? Like, what factors are considered when you're deciding how you're pivoting and what you're focusing on?
Yeah, that's a good question. So
Hmm.
we launched into early access specifically so that we could get community
Hmm.
feedback, good and bad, right? And the challenge for us is that we've gotten a lot of feedback, good and bad.
Yeah.
And the community doesn't speak with one singular voice. It speaks with a lot of really loud voices,
Hmm.
right? And so I am really grateful for all of the feedback that people are sending us on Discord or Reddit or social media for people playing the game. Like this is really, it's a gift, but it is also a challenge for us to deal with and figure out how to react. And so of course, as we get feedback and as we listen to it, our development priorities shift a bit.
Hmm.
And so I think we're doing our best to show those shifts on our roadmap, and I can see a perspective of, wow, they keep changing the roadmap all the time. I don't really know what they're aiming for. Do they even know what they're building, right?
Hmm.
And again, we are trying to communicate with the community and trying to do so in a good way, but we're still sorting it out, right? Some of these things we're doing better on than others. There's a lot of room for us to improve. But the goal for the roadmaps is to, as things change, share with the community what our priorities are within development. Sometimes that might be because we really have heard the community loud and clear that this is a priority. We want to pull it up. Sometimes because we've pulled something up, a specific developer or maybe a group of the team is now overworked. So now we need to actually sort that out for a bit and then maybe push something back in the schedule as we really scope out the new work that they're doing. And so there's this tug of war that goes on as we are shifting things around based off of community feedback that is not always clean and easy to just put out on a roadmap and say this is going to hold up for the next 4 months. It does change, and that's something that we're going to keep working on how we can improve our communication around. But I think it's a natural side effect of the process. Um, it's also, generally speaking, work that we know we need to do and we have planned. We have a laundry list a mile deep, even
Hmm.
without community feedback, about all the things that we want to do to this game to have it reach the quality bar that we believe it can hit. And what the community helps us identify is which things they care the most about, and that helps us pull some things in closer, push some things out, and it really helps us shift things around. But it doesn't really change the vision that we have for the project. We're still going for that same endpoint, but we may be shifting the steps along the way to happen in a different order.
And does that happen in real time? So, for example, I think 2 roadmaps ago, you all had said, "Okay, we hear you loud and clear. There wants to be team games. We're going to move
Yes.
3v3. We're going to move that up in the process." And then the most recent roadmap actually had that pulling back a little bit in favor of some
Yeah.
other things. So that
I,
was a
I'm
1 or 2 month change. Yeah, go ahead.
I actually really glad you asked that because in this case, the process worked as intended.
Okay.
Community shared that they wanted team games, so we pulled team games much closer in our roadmap. We've gone through multiple rounds of play testing and put a bunch of work into building up the game. We've gotten the feedback that we need.
Okay.
So now we need to kind of take it off of the live game treadmill, kind of put it behind closed curtains. We need to work on the next phase of it really before we can bring it back out. We have it's still absolutely part of our plan, but the feedback that we got was really, really positive, but also that it still needed work in these areas. And so that's the process that we're working through. And in light of that, 1v1 is shifting more into the focus while we work on that. And so these things are not changes in direction or changes in priority really from in terms of like our dev team's vision, but they're just a natural reordering as we work through the development process. And in fact, I think as we work through factions 2.0, um, you'll actually, or the people who have been part of the 3v3 Team Mayhem playtest, might see us actually incorporating a lot of elements from that into the 1v1 core experience. We really felt like from a pacing perspective and a sheer fun perspective, 3v3 made a lot of good choices and really had a good feel to the moment to moment gameplay. However, it did so by deviating a bit from the traditional structure that we have in 1v1. And so we're going to be going through a process where we're trying to actually bring some of these fun touch points from 3v3 games into 1v1. We think they'll translate beautifully and help 1v1 be a lot more fun. And then also going the other direction, have some more of the 1v1 faction structure and asymmetry really flow into 3v3. So the modes become closer and they both gain from each other. So in this particular case, it's not we do one thing and then we set aside and do the other thing. They actually feed together as they come in and out of focus for us.
Gotcha. So I got two more questions. One is very wide open that I try to ask everyone towards the end. Was there anything that you came here today excited to talk about Stormgate
Mm.
process moving forward, that for whatever reason we haven't had a chance to talk yet, but you really are excited about?
Yeah, there's actually several things I could talk about. I'll try to hold it
Okay.
to a couple. First, um, surprise, surprise, our players really want to be able to customize their hotkeys,
Okay.
right? This is something that has I'm going to admit, I was surprised, really, really surprised that this has consistently been the top request for so long from the community for us. And I'm excited to share that in our Krogoth release, which is coming up mid to late February, we're putting out a massive overhaul of our hotkey systems. So that will include top to bottom, fully customizable hotkeys. So you can play grid or you can not. You can just use universal hotkeys. We are supporting it with a graphical interface where you can see all the units and you can see all the hotkeys. You can set your hotkeys differently for each faction. You can set your hotkeys differently for each faction in each mode. And there's a lot of really just robust support around this. Coincidentally, the system to support customizable hotkeys is also sharing a lot underneath the hood with our automated control group system and being able to customize them. So we're also shipping that in Krogoth alongside it. And this similarly shares a graphical interface where you can see all your hotkeys and for all the factions in all the modes, and you can customize which things go into which hotkeys automatically. And so as you play into games, your hotkeys will just naturally fill with the units that you want going into each hotkey. And this allows things like your deployed atlases can go in one hotkey and your undeployed atlases can go in a different hotkey if you wanted to play that way. You could take all of your combat units and put them into one hotkey, and that's effectively an all army hotkey. You could, there's so many different ways that you could approach this. Really, these things are going to combine together to let players customize how they play Stormgate and to be able to play it in the way that's most natural and comfortable for them. And we've supported this with a bunch of other smaller functions underneath the hood. For example, we now will support stealing units from hotkeys and from control groups and adding them into control groups. So as you go, if you wanted to drop some units out of your all army hotkeys, you wanted them to stay there, you can now steal and add as well too. We've added cycling through the tabs as a hotkey, your quick macro panel tab, cycling through all your HQ buildings. Just a really massive overhaul here, and it's all going out concerted in the same update. And so, really, really excited to see what players do with that and what their feedback is. I think people are going to be really excited about it.
Yeah, the full custom automated hotkeys. I talked to Ryan about that, Ryan Shooter, a long time ago, because custom hotkeys came in and it was what it is right now. But obviously, and he said, no, we'll have full customization eventually. I am so excited for that, so I don't have to go fight with my Spriggans every single time.
Nope.
It's great. That's actually
Yeah.
very exciting.
And this is one of those areas where like the community just had so many different voices. I
Yeah.
want to be able to do this with hotkeys. I want to be able to do this with hotkeys. I want to be able to do different things. And really, it all boiled down to having a really flexible, centralized feature here that would allow everybody to kind of pick their own poison and set up their hotkeys the way they want to. And so I think this is going to remove a huge thorn in people's sides and let them just enjoy playing the game in whatever way feels most natural to them. And like Ryan said, this was something we wanted to get to eventually, but so what we have done is basically just pull it up earlier in priority rather than changing our direction. Um, and so yeah, I wanted to share that. I also wanted to share a bit of an update around campaign. We didn't really dive too much into the campaign on this conversation, but we are working really, really hard on it. I would say it's the number one highest development priority that we have as a studio, followed secondarily by our Faction 2.0 efforts. And I think players are going to be really happy and maybe surprised by the degree to which we have changed things. We really kind of tore it down to the studs and have rebuilt. We've added and changed and relayed out missions. We have put a lot of systems work into the campaign so that you can save and load at any point, so that you can visit a hub between missions where you can walk around and talk to NPCs in a new conversation system where there's an item stash and you can store items that you don't want to be hauling around in missions, where you can spend currency to get these upgrades to your army or research new technologies which change how you play. Um, we've put all of that system work into it, and then added things like your heroes will now level up, and that will transfer between missions. They'll be able to pick different traits as they get customized. Um, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some things, and my level designers are not going to be happy with me for doing that. But it really is. It feels like a laundry list of things because we have gone all in on making the campaign really take you on a journey that has a strong mood, a strong narrative, and real high quality throughout the whole thing, and that is um, very consciously going in a different direction than what Blizzard games have done in the past with their campaigns too. So it will feel like a really fresh experience.
So I guess we're just gonna, when we get closer to that, we're gonna have you back and really dive into the campaign because
Absolutely, there's a lot
Mhm.
there, and we are hurrying to get it out to players as quickly as we can. So just rest assured, we are hard at work on that, and it's our highest priority.
Awesome. So final question before we let you go. What is one thing that you would say to people who are on the fence or don't believe in Stormgate right now?
You know, we are really a group of people who banded together to make this type of game.
Hmm.
The whole point of Frost Giant as a company, the whole point of our team coming together was because we were frustrated RTS developers who couldn't build RTSs elsewhere, and we wanted to come together to build this game. And our vision for it has always been to develop this game with the community and really help revitalize the genre, hopefully so that we can see more RTS games from other developers, so that we can grow the audience and have more RTS people to share this genre that we're passionate about with. And so I think there's definitely a group of players who will want to wait till 1.0, till the game is finished or till it's completed to play the game, and that is totally, totally okay. I'm that way for most games that I play myself too, so I absolutely understand that and respect that. But if you are the type of player who's passionate about this, who wants to support developers who are really invested and solely focused on this genre, and who want to be on this journey with us, I encourage you to join our Discord to try the game out. You can play all the modes for free. It's something that you can see right now today on Steam, and your voice, it would be super valuable in helping to shape the direction of this game going forward. We have already improved a lot in the game directly based off of community feedback. So if that excites you to actually be a part of this and to help Stormgate become this great game that you can experience and play with for many years to come, I would love to see your comments and to have you be a part of this. So come on and join us on this journey.
All right. Thank you so much, Tim, for taking time out of your day. This has been great. I think we learned a lot. I'm very excited about what's in store. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next time you're on.
Thank you so much for having me on.